Hey, everybody, it's D. Welcome back to the Broken Brain. This is your Monday mental health tip. I still have a bit of a raspy voice. Those of you over on the Patreon know that, as I had to put up a different episode rather than a freshly recorded history dive last week, but we'll be back again with that this week. And you got to hear the next episode of Fan with an E, where Dalen and I cover the show Anne with an E. Those of you on the main feed, you may hear some of those coming up, but we've got several of them dropping on the Patreon just now. If you're a fan of that show or want to hear about how trauma and psychological elements can be used in a retelling of an good old story, then yeah, check that out. Well, your mental health tip today is in relation to the upcoming Hollandaise. Not Hollandaise, I think that's what I said, but the upcoming Hollandaise sauce that you put on your eggs Benedict, famously named for that traitor. Anyway, no, it's the holidays coming up, and for those of us in the United States, we are coming up this Thursday on Thanksgiving, a day in which people have lots of different feelings about, as we do often about the holidays. There is lots of joy and fun and family time for many people. Some people view it also as a reminder of things that they don't really love about the holidays. I think it's very important to feel how you feel and to know that it's okay to feel how we feel. And that's kind of what this is about today. You know, as a therapist, when I worked for some mental health agencies, we would always get a call around this time of year from a reporter or two who would want someone to give some tips about surviving the holidays and keeping your mental health intact and yada, yada, yada. So I got to do that a couple times where they'd say, hey, do you want to talk to this person? And it was always interesting because when you try to narrow it down to just a tip, boy, you know, that kind of seems a little hard, but not for some of us who do a tip every single week. But anyway, there's not really a tip that eliminates all of the stressors with the holidays coming up, of course. But there's a lot of hard work that you do overall in therapy to try to move through a lot of things, emotional reactivity, a lot of course, the stuff that goes into our mental health. So my first little element of this tip is keep doing the healthy things that you do. Don't pressure yourself to add a lot of new healthy things. Traditionally and historically, this is a time of year where people say, how do I keep healthy and not have snacks and such? It's like, no, you're probably this is not a good time of year to add something new in that way. But you might find that it's a time to highlight the things you already do for your mental health. And it naturally leads to goal setting, yada, yada. Probably have an episode coming. We always have an episode about setting goals for the new year or why it's good or why it's bad to do so. So that'll be coming up soon too. But the real tip for this week is tradition. You could sing a song about that, maybe even put it in a Broadway play if they were. Was Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway? I'm sure it was at some point, right? Let's bring it back. But whatever holidays you celebrate or don't celebrate, this time of year is a time where, once again, historically long ago, I believe people celebrated in the winter to celebrate the fact that they'd survived. And that's why a lot of celebrations include light. And you can get all into the history of that, but tradition is always a part of how we celebrate. And today, I just want to recommend that you look around and say, do I have any traditions? Now, oftentimes those are passed down and you don't control them. But do you have any traditions that are just for you as a way to mark the time, to survive that you're still here in the middle of this dark winter time? A personal tradition can be something that you do with others or just by yourself. I'll give you a couple examples. You might find that going for a simple walk, either with others or by yourself. Many people have that tradition on Thanksgiving because of all the food and stuff, and maybe it's good to just get out there and stretch your legs. Some people get out and play some football together. I guess you could do that by yourself too, if you're fast enough. Remember Bugs Bunny, how he could run around those bases and still be at bat? I think he was the pitcher too. Write to me here at the show and let me know if Bugs Bunny also pitched that game. Or it can be something much more personal, like something that you do for your own health or taking some time to meditate. It doesn't have to be something that you never do other times, but maybe it's something that you allow yourself during the holiday. Do you go and look at the decorations somewhere, either by yourself or with others? Do you take some time for self care, for reading? Do you do something new that you haven't done before? Do you take some time for yourself to do something? Nothing is too serious or too silly for this kind of thing. I find oftentimes giving ourselves permission to be silly or do something that seems small is almost harder than trying to plan something that's big or thinking that it's okay to do something big, in other words. I have a couple of those. The Thanksgiving weekend, for example, there's a podcast that I like to listen to. The people from the podcast, My Brother and Me, the McElroy brothers, that is. If you're familiar, if you're a podcast fan, you might be. And also Guy Brennan and Tim Batt, who are the comedians from New Zealand who did the Worst Idea of All Time podcast. They do an annual podcast, these five people, where they talk about the movie Paul Blart 2. It's called Till Death Do Us Blart, and it is released around Thanksgiving every year. It is super silly. I sometimes, while doing meal prep or even some shopping or things like that, whenever it happens to come out, if it's before the holiday, I like to listen to that. But they watch that movie every year and then they talk about it, and they talk about some just silliness, basically. It's just silly. And I like it. I like that it's silly. Another silly little tradition I have is that every year I like to sit down and live tweet the dog show, if you're familiar. The Philadelphia Westminster dog show. I didn't look up the name right before, but it's the one that's on after the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And I like to go over to my Twitter, which I'm still on. Maybe I should transition this and live Instagram it or Blue Sky it. I'm not really sure. I'm not set up for that this year. But I go and tweet throughout, and I try to make my tweets as silly as possible because, once again, I enjoy being silly. And I will say some of the biggest successes that I've ever had with social media is when John O'Hurley, who is one of the hosts of that show, has responded to some of the texts that I have atted him in, including when when he mentioned an old silly Christmas movie he'd been in with a certain breed of dog, and I was able to post that, and he was kind enough to have a little response to the silliness of that. So, most successful thing I've probably ever done on social media. You can follow with me if you want to at Break a Brain. This was not meant to be a plug for that, but I just decided to work it in because it's a silly little tradition. If I don't do it, does anyone care? No. In fact, sometimes self-care is even best when it is only something that you might miss if you didn't do it, but that other people wouldn't necessarily notice or miss if you did it. Obviously, John O'Hurley is hanging on my every tweet, as I already established, friend of the show. I'm going to go ahead and make him friend of the show by extension that he replied to 2 or 3 of my texts over the last 5 years. But, look around and find yourself any traditions that you would like to. I'd love to hear from you if you have any little personal traditions, really at any time, that you would like to share with other people. As always, if you do reach out to me about that, you can do so at social media. It's at Break a Brain on Twitter. There's the Broken Brain Podcast group on Facebook, and then it's at Brainiacs Ahoy. That's one word. That well-worn phrase, Brainiacs Ahoy. A lot of sailors do that while they're listening to the podcast, but that's my at for the show on Instagram and TikTok, which are both a little newer for me to do stuff concerning the show. So you can give feedback there, obviously, or just email me, dwighthurst@gmail.com. Go to dwighthurst.com/contact if you like to fill out contact things on websites, and who among us does not? Do it every year. It'll become your tradition. But anyway, if you do share that, as always, let me know if you mind if I share that on the show, because I might either, share it on social or say it on the show, but only if you tell me I can. If it's just for us, it's just for us. That's our little tradition. You sharing with me. I hope that everybody who is having a holiday or a big family thing this week, that you have a good time, that it goes well and gives you whatever you want to get out of it. If you don't have a lot of contacts, family, friends, and things that are doing anything. I hope that you either take the time to mark the time and be thankful, or just don't worry about it if it's something that you don't worry about, and try not to let that pressure get to you. Feel however you feel and tell yourself that it's okay. That kind of radical acceptance towards self is a great piece of self care and a great tradition to try to have every day. Thanks, everybody. Regular episode tomorrow. And it was recorded before, so you won't have to hear my voice like this. Bye-bye.